Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umir, who's a professional football scout and analyst, and we're here today to cover Hato's move to Chelsea. Okay, welcome back to the channel. It's been a nice, relaxed week for me. I've been away, caught the sun, so...
The channel would have never known.
No, never known. But today we're here to cover Hato's move to Chelsea from Ajax, and this is one that had kind of come out of the blue whilst I was away, but seems like Chelsea are now moving quite fast in the market, very efficiently, despite them obviously playing in the Club World Cup and winning it. This is going to be a very interesting one because it's a very rogue signing, I would say. He's a very well talked about player. He's only 19 years old. He's played 2 full seasons at Ajax, barely missed any minutes. And he actually wears the armband for his club, which is, at 19, something that is a massive thing when we're talking about...
Such a historic club as well.
Yeah, such a big club. So we're talking about a very young, astute and highly regarded defender. And today we're going to talk about what he brings to Maresca's Chelsea and why we actually think it's quite nicely fit into what they're trying to do on the left side of that defence. So just right away, do you want to go into sort of what you make of Hato as a player in general?
Look, Hato he's an interesting player, and he's certainly, like you mentioned, a really highly regarded one. He's been linked to some of the best teams in world football. For me personally, I think his versatility stands out. His leadership, obviously, like you mentioned, having the armband at such a young age is really important, but his versatility is his prime quality for me, because if we're just looking at this shape in general, he can play in these left centre-back positions, in your 3 at the back shape in possession. He can move into these positions when he's attacking. He can do this kind of central midfield stuff in possession as well when you're pinning teams back. And then at times as well, he can float out into the wide areas and provide an overlap. So that versatility and how that works for Chelsea is what we'll explain throughout this video. But that paired with his leadership and his sensible head are sort of the 3 main qualities that make him stand out as a really promising young player in world football.
Yeah, so we're talking about, obviously, an Ajax-educated Dutch defender, and obviously, without generalising him, he's what you would expect on the ball. He's a very crisp, clean passer. One thing that's really, really good about him, if we say this is him right here, let's say, if he likes to step out a lot on the ball. So he played left-back predominantly last season, but the season before, you talked to me before, he actually was more of a central defender. We'll talk about his position in a minute, but he's one of these players who has this sort of idea to step out with the ball into midfield and almost drive past players. I think his pace, his genuine mobility on the ball is very good. He's very slick. He's very agile. He dodges pressure really well. And that when you're stepping out of the back line, from this position, is probably a little bit riskier. I watched him when they played Finland in the under-21s Euros, and he did play left centre half, and he was very, very, confident in stepping out. But when you're doing it from central defence, it's a bit more risky at such a young age, and you can get caught out. Whereas if you do it from left back, it's a little bit more efficient, and it suits his angles and style better. Yeah. But yeah, he's a very crisp, clean, technical passer. I think he's got everything. He's one of them players who, there was often this trend about centre-half stepping on the ball and waiting for the pressure and then playing these little stab passes through the midfield. He is one of them players. Just very, very educated and intelligent on the ball. And I think I've actually got some data here to show you that his most similar players, using Opta's wheel chart sort of graphic that we've got here, we've got Rico Lewis from Manchester City and Di Lorenzo from Napoli, most importantly, as the 2 standout players. Yeah. And what they're both very good at doing is sort of playing these fullback areas, but they offer sort of possession quality here. They go high and wide. They can go into midfield.
They receive a lot of progressive passes.
There's a lot of passes into them. I think if I was going to compare him really quickly to a player, I spoke to you just a minute ago off camera, he does seem like he's this Gvardiol Calafiori mould. And what I mean by that is he's a converted central defender who's now playing left back, but does almost everything as a fullback. He can, as Umir mentioned, he can tuck inside, he can receive out here, he can go into midfield, he can hold the width, and more importantly, he can play in this area for Chelsea, which is what we'll go on to speak about in terms of his tactical usage. But yeah, just an amazingly elegant player on the ball. I think his technical ability is really, really sound. He's very pretty on the eye. He looks the part. But yeah, do you want to go in to speak about sort of some of his movements that we've seen Chelsea's Maresca use a lot last season, which was getting them full-backs sort of in these unpredictable positions. We also seen Mikel Arteta do it with Miles Lewis-Skelly and Calafiori, which is these inverted fullbacks are not inverting directly into midfield. They're actually attacking these spaces. And Hato has a lot of quality there. He got 8 assists in the league last season, which was, as a defender, the second best in the division. So can you maybe explain to me why sort of it's his attacking quality or his presence in the final third that is actually his unique selling point?
Yeah, so look, like we mentioned, he's played kind of 2 versions of his game over the last couple of seasons. The first version of his game was a very touch-heavy, sort of dictating kind of role, and he had so many touches of the ball, games with 100 or so touches, passing the ball into these forward areas and getting into these spaces facing forward, and that was kind of his role primarily initially. Now, from there on, he's moved into left back, and his interpretation of left back has been a very unique one because, again, he's done so many different things. Now, if you put that into the context of Chelsea, we've often seen Marc Cucurella in these positions. Against PSG, he was the left centre back of a 3 with Colwell here and Chalobah here. And typically, when you think of in possession sides that set up with 3 at the back, you kind of imagine that your back 3 are fairly rigid, and then these players kind of move around, and your front 5 are where your attacking play comes from. But we're seeing a trend generally in football, and particularly with Chelsea, of getting an extra body in this last line and trying to get a 6th man here, often because teams now drop another player into the back line and form their own back 5 to match up this attacking front 5. Now, teams can do this with the midfielder, which is often the case, and you see these 3-1-6 shapes. But with Chelsea, what we've seen often, and what's worked really well, is Cucurella arriving in these positions really nicely, especially when your number 9 is typically not a box 9. It might be a João Pedro or Nico Jackson moving out of these areas. Your Cole Palmer might drop deep into these areas, and you've got the space here to attack because of the movement of your front players. So with Hato, we know from what we've seen this season, he can do a variety of roles, and getting into these areas is certainly one of the things that he can do. He's not always trying to get into these areas to score. I've often seen him kind of come into these areas, have a ball chipped over, and then he plays the cutback, and that's where some of his assists are coming from. But another thing that allows him to kind of be creatively involved in these areas is by finding your players who are running inside. So he's not always the last line runner, but he can do a lot of this play from the edge of the area in the pockets or just in front of the pockets as somebody who's so technically proficient and comfortable on the ball in those areas.
So I want to move on now into talking about something Umair just mentioned, which was sort of his ability to arrive in this space. I think I said before that he has 8 assists. It's 6 assists, so forgive me there. But so I've got his assist map here available to me on the screen now from Opta. And what we're actually seeing here is a lot of balls played square across the box. I actually think every assist on this graphic is squared from this area right here across the face of the box. So as Umair's mentioned, if we're thinking that this is Jorrel Hato and we're thinking this is someone like a Jamie Gittins, a Pedro Neto, and then obviously we've got the extra pocket player here, which might be Xavi Simons. But if we think about this player here, we've got Xavi Simons here. If we're looking for these unpredictable runners, we're looking for someone who can create as well as score. Interestingly, Jorrel Hato's like quite goal hungry, not goal hungry in terms of he takes a lot of shots, but his actual comfortability in the final third isn't that of a defender. It's quite unique, and that's why I'm liking to compare him to a Gavardi or a Calafiori. Defenders who score. One comparison
I might make is almost like a Nuno Mendes in how PSG utilize him is how Chelsea might be able to utilize him. And also the ability to do all of those different roles. And also in his game itself, it's more technical or more based on technical proficiency than a Nuno Mendes, which is massively technical as well. But Nuno Mendes is a bit more powerful in his running style. But generally, the way that they approach situations and where they find themselves in, he might be able to scale up like a Nuno Mendes has done in seasons gone by.
Yeah, I think as well, he is an extremely technical player, but one thing that I actually noticed when I was watching him, I think I watched him against Aston Villa and I think it was Brighton in Europe, in the European competition, and he's actually, when you're looking at players, especially translating from the Eredivisie, which is a league that has had a lot of question marks over it in terms of translating to the Premier League, I was looking for sort of standout physical attributes. So if you're moving to the league, you've got to look slow. Hato doesn't look slow, and against Premier League opposition, he looks very fast, very mobile. He's a very silky, smooth player, and his runs are incredible. And Obviously, as I mentioned, this is sort of his like key area, and I think that suits especially Jamie Gittins, as we've talked about on the channel. If he's swinging in here and he's running here, and maybe they're rotating out wide, that gets Jamie Gittins into these areas, that gets Hato in these areas. It suits Chelsea's dynamics very, very well.
Yeah. Just one thing, sorry, on dynamics. I know we mentioned Xavi Simons for this area, but if we're talking about these movements in behind, especially against a packed defence, I think I just want to mention that Enzo Fernandez dinks the ball into these spaces so often, and often there's not runners in these spaces for him to find. But that dinked pass from an Enzo Fernandez actually makes me think that if you play him in that sort of double pivot, like we mentioned here, he'll be really impressive in trying to find that run and getting him in his best zone.
If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications.
I've got his open play passes here, which sort of show what we're talking about. He's very much a touchline fullback, but a lot of touches coming also inside the pitch, which is what we're talking about here. But I actually want to go on into talking about Jorrel Hato's dueling. And this is something that, in my opinion, is his sort of weakest element of his game. So I've got some data here that says for duel success rate in the Eredivisie for 24-25 with duels minimum of 100, Jorrel Hato is 67th out of 92 defenders. Now, that for me is a pretty big worry, especially if we're talking about sort of playing 1v1. I know he's being brought in to sort of be this rotation for Cucurella, because no Chelsea player actually played more games than Cucurella for Chelsea this season, including the Club World Cup. I think he played 4 games more than Moises Caicedo. So he's definitely someone who needs rest and he needs someone to rotate. And there's no way you can do that with a better player who's 19, who's played a lot of minutes over the last couple of seasons, who's got the captaincy at his own club, and so on. But yeah, 67th out of 92 for dueling, 50 out of 57 defenders in the Eredivisie last season for ground duel success rate, which is obviously not a great number. He's 7th from bottom. It's actually a very, very bad return. And I think a lot of people have maybe talked about Cucurella being a bit weaker defensively. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, because obviously he has a similar sort of aggressiveness in his dueling approach. I think when wingers square him up, which is probably the one thing that I've noticed, which is quite worrying, is, and I will actually balance this out with something that Maresca's doing, which actually might cover him, is if a winger's here and he sort of takes him deep into the box, it's sort of his footwork when he's retreating to his own goal where he kind of gets stuck in the mud a little bit, which is a bit confusing for me, because as we've mentioned, he's very agile, very mobile, and you would think he could cover, you know, sort of all angles, be fluid on the turn. But he does struggle to get his feet right, especially when he's taken deep 1v1 into the box. There's a couple goals that teams have scored against Ajax where they almost stand him up and he literally just one shimmy and he sort of gets stuck in the mud and his legs get trapped. Now, what Chelsea did in the Club World Cup, which I found worked very, very, very well, especially against PSG in the final, was the role of Pedro Neto, which we spoke about on the main overlap channel, which was sort of using him as this back 5 chain. And Pedro Neto playing here 1v1 against the opposition's wingers and Jorrel Hato being a little bit more inside to deal with the number 8 probably masks some of his ground duel weaknesses and lets Pedro Neto actually take that responsibility, which would suit him in defence for me. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you make of sort of, you know, young defenders moving to definitely a better league, more physical league, maybe has a higher level of technical dribblers. What do you make of sort of young defenders who struggle with that sort of dueling approach, that 1v1 approach?
Yeah, look, I think it's difficult, especially when you move to a league as big as the Premier League. There's so many eyes on you. The scrutiny is really harsh, especially for a club as big as Chelsea as well. I think oftentimes you just need to kind of go through that teething period and face the bad moments and kind of come through the other end of it as a better player. I always think of John Stones, for example, who, you know, he didn't move from a different league, but he made a lot of errors defensively in terms of his dueling at the start. And he was a very strong technical player. He had brilliant ball playing quality, but it took him a few years, certainly 3-4 years, until he kind of established himself as a really strong defender and a really great dueler in terms of how he marshaled those areas. So I do think it's something that you can learn. It's good, in my opinion, that he's coming in as a second option to Cucurella, because the pressure will be reduced, and then you can kind of get him in games where if he was to make an error defensively, it perhaps doesn't mean as much, for example, against teams lower down the league. I do think that this Chelsea side is set up to kind of mitigate some of his weaknesses, because I do think Cucurella has a lot of those similar weaknesses. I think I've spoken before about how in defensive situations, Cucurella likes to jump very early, often in situations where the rest of the team aren't pressing, to his nearest man. And especially if he's starting a bit deeper, in trying to jump forward, there's space often in behind him for players to find the ball. In his very aggressive nature, he can get spun a little bit as well. He concedes at the back post in heading situations. And irrespective of all of that, Chelsea have had a decent amount of success and people have praised him as having a really strong season last season. So those things are mitigated by the work that Chelsea do out of possession, like you mentioned, Neto.
In the structure.
Yeah. Colwell coming across. If Hato is higher up the pitch in attacking situations anyway, look, and the opposition get the ball, he's not involved in the defensive situation anyway. So in counter-attacking situations, he's not going to find himself in these areas in the same way Cucurella didn't. And then it's up to your defensive players, your Colwell's going across, your Chalobah's moving over, whether this is Enzo Fernandez or Caicedo coming across and Neto dropping back. And then those are the players who are kind of covering for him when he's higher up the pitch. So in the same way that they've covered for Cucurella, I think they're banking on the fact that he'll probably be serviceable when he is in a low set defence. But ideally, they want to keep as much of the ball as possible and use him in the final third to come up with solutions in general.
Yeah, I think he's one of them defenders who's, it sounds really crazy because we're talking about a left back or a central defender, sort of that hybrid player who's, more focused on going forward. But that is how Chelsea were. Yeah, that's how Chelsea were last season, and they used the fullbacks in these unpredictable situations. And I think they got them a lot of goals, a lot of headers.
I think that's the trend across world football. You're seeing the rise of man-to-man pressure. Your fullbacks are the players who aren't picked up because wingers don't want to track them all the way back anyways. So if you've got these very positionally free fullbacks, your Gvardiols, Nico O'Reilly from Manchester City, Nuno Mendes and Hakimi, Gusto, Cucurella, they all put up goal-scoring seasons. That is what the new football tactical meta essentially is. Those are the free players in your possession sides.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I did get the assist wrong, but it's 8 GA, so he's got 8 goals and assists plus, which is
for a left
back.
Or centre back, really.
Yeah, for that sort of player, that's probably where Chelsea are looking, and they've looked at what he's really good at and looked at where he excels, and you can tell that this sort of stuff is definitely where he can excel. I think he might actually stand a little bit of chance of moving inside more than Cucurella and Gusto. I think he's got a little bit more technical efficiency in terms of his touch is better. He drops the shoulder really well. He's a very unique profile. On the ball, he does a lot of things, and I think his pace and power off it is good enough to match the Premier League standard. I don't think it's a situation where you're signing, I don't know, when Lisandro Martinez had the scrutiny for being a smaller centre-half, I think people sort of meshed over that because he was really aggressive, he was really front-footed, but then it was sort of his speed for his size that wasn't good enough.
Yeah, but I think Timber's an example, isn't it?
Timber as well. And I think he is a bit speculative defensively, and I think there is a lot to work on in terms of sort of his 1v1 dueling.
Yeah.
But I think if Chelsea have that structure where Pedro Neto's covering the winger, he's a little bit more tucked inside. If he only has to just step out and apply pressure onto the number 8, then I think he can work. I think it can be a very, very good signing. It's an astute signing. And as you mentioned at the top of this video, this is a player that most European clubs wanted. And I think for 40 million euros or whatever the fee is, it's a very good depth option. It's
with huge upside.
With huge upside. Potential upside's absolutely massive. Chelsea are really good at flipping players in case it goes wrong. But it gives Cucurella sort of rest in his legs. And I think it's a very, very smart tactical sign in terms of looking at what Maresca does, looking at what Hato does. I think he does a lot of the same things. But yeah very interesting signing, I must say. And I'm really excited to see how he does. And Chelsea as a whole this season are going to be very, very interesting. And what do you make of sort of the potentially going to get Xavi Simons as well, which we will cover on the channel if it happens. What would you say sort of Xavi Simons, João Pedro, Delap, Gittins?
Look, I mean, crazy. My summary of all of that is the variety in profiles, the variety in tactical solutions it provides you is brilliant. And I think that's what Chelsea are trying to do. I think at any point in the season, teams can get figured out. And also teams can pose unique tactical questions for them to try and figure out. So the more sort of tools you have in your toolbox, the better. And especially if you've got a manager like Maresca who might be able to kind of come up with a new system or a new solution on the fly, then that's even better. Just to kind of wrap up this video, I would say Gittins gives you that 1v1 dribbling quality against deep set defenses wide. You've got a João Pedro who can kind of move off the last line and contribute to scoring goals in and around here, but generally links play in these pockets here. You've got a Liam Delap who occupies the box really well, but also gives you that counter-attacking threat, which João Pedro doesn't necessarily do on the last line like a Liam Delap. If Xavi Simons comes in, he's a pockets player in that left half space that they don't really have at the moment, like they do on the other side with Cole Palmer. And then Hato gives you the alternative to perhaps a Cucurella in the sense that he can do some of this more deep build-up, and Cucurella likes to go forward or wide, and they can kind of do both, but it gives you a wide array of tactical solutions in general that, look, Chelsea kind of have answers for a lot of questions if used properly. So look, it'll be interesting to see how it does progress and also what system Maresca does land on, because there's so many ways he can use this team. But I do think it's putting them in good stead for a really long season.
Yeah, I'm really not invested in the project, but I'm actually excited. Yeah,
Interested.
It looks like a good team on paper. I think the Xavi Simons sign, if they wrap that up as well, they have two pocket players who have outstanding quality, and I'm just thinking about him meshing with Liam Delap, João Pedro, Gittins, premium dribbler on the left. It's just it looks really good for Chelsea, I must say, and get excited. It's a very young, astute signing, smart signing tactically. So brilliant. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment, and follow the channel, and we'll be back next week for some more analysis. Thank you.